Welcome us back.
All right, we're back. It's Flyover Footy. This is the wind down. I think we've officially decided to call it that. We've finished our stream for the Big 550 KTRS. Now we just get to hang out and talk. Matt, you just popped another beer, and I got to learn from you. I got to have another beer ready to go.
I always try to hold it for this time. I like the wind down. It's a little bit more casual, a little less pressure, just a
Yeah.
little more chatty. And man, do we have some things to really chat about with this one.
Well, let's start with a question because I don't even have anything. I think we got plenty of time this time. Ryan Hickerson asks, how long do we estimate Indy to keep his mask on? It's a good question.
Well, he definitely starts it with the mask. I think he's going to placate the training staff for that one again. And he did go. I wasn't joking when I said he went 12 minutes with the mask. There was, if you remember, with Portland, that's when Evander came in. It was around the 8 or 9 minute mark. There was the injury, and it looked like a pretty bad leg injury. He had to be carted off the field. I can't remember the player, but it was bad. And the camera panned to him, and they panned away from our team for a significant amount of time. And when Indy was shown on the screen next, he was without his mask. So sometime in that downtime, he tossed it, and it just never made its appearance again.
Indy cracks me up, man. I mean, it's
those
not
pictures this week,
surprising
right?
at all.
On the app, there's pictures of him in training, and him in that mask with the beard is menacing.
It's a lot. Yeah.
It's hilarious. But no, I think he goes 10 to 15 minutes again. I basically think he'll look for the first opportunity to toss it because I predict him to start. And I really think it's one of those cheeky things of he knows he has to start with the mask, but they're not going to like force it back on him when he tosses it off.
I picture him just like if he gets too much time to think about it or worry about it, that's when he throws it off. Where like if he can run and play, he's good. But the second he has to think about it too much, it's over.
That's fair. And if it's like the one he was wearing last week that he said it obstructs his field of vision a little bit, can totally understand not wanting to have that during a match. And assuming the pain threshold isn't too severe with that broken nose, I don't blame him.
My goodness, yeah. When you start running, things get numb. You forget about, problems.
And the cold weather now, right? I mean, his face is going to be numb anyway.
Yeah, especially the nose. That's true. Cool. What else do you want to, is there anything you want to hit before? I want to talk about Firmino maybe later, unless you want to talk about that now.
I was going to say, do you want to circle back to Blom for a minute?
Yeah, let's do that.
So we talked about the basics of it all. Blom having been out last week from a health and safety protocol, which we knew about middle of last week. We heard about that around this time last week on that Thursday or Friday. And assuming as you do with health and safety protocols, that it has to do with COVID. I don't think that's a leap in today's world, that if you hear somebody's in health and safety protocol, it's the assumption, whether or not they say it in any sport nowadays. So if that's the case or whatever it ends up being, those kinds of things tend to linger a little bit. As anybody who's had COVID or known somebody who's had COVID, that thing lingers for a period of time where you're still testing positive. Maybe you're still having some symptoms. That appears to be the case, whatever it is, because he's still listed in health and safety. He's out for this weekend. But the really interesting thing is that article from Hugo Broos, the manager for the South African national team, where he says some really interesting things about St. Louis City not providing a detailed explanation about what's going on with Blom. And I do want to caution that this is everything I'm about to read is from the article in SABC Sport, and it's from his side. So anything I say that is not necessarily indicative of what City's doing or City's perspective, but he does say, first of all, we see how things are going in the next hours, but Jabulu played the first 2 games in St. Louis, and the last game he didn't play. So they immediately contacted the club to see what was happening. And the club, and there's some translation issues here, but it says the club said, "Oh, it's not so hard. He's sick." Okay, he's sick, but they're like, "What is he sick with?" So they apparently contacted Blom, and Blom, according to the South African national team coach, said, "Yeah, I don't feel so good. I think I have COVID." And that's in the article. So the manager said, "Okay, but do a test and then we'll see if you have COVID. Test it." So today it's Thursday, and we've been speaking since Tuesday already. Yesterday we got a mail from St. Louis at 5 p.m. that the coaching and medical staff were discussing the situation. So the article goes on to say now we're 20 hours later and we haven't had an answer until now. And this article came out today, by the way, Thursday that we're recording this. Am I nervous? No, I'm angry. This is not correct. You tell us, oh, this is the problem. He has COVID. Okay, we have to change. But when the situation is not clear, you start thinking about things that are maybe not there. And then he goes on to speculate that I saw in America, there's a league game next week, the 26th of March, they play. So then he starts to speculate of if he doesn't come with a correct reason, he will not play with them because then we'll go to FIFA. I'm very angry about that, really. There's a lot of chest puffing going on in this article, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, it worries me a little bit to hear a national team coach say that he's angry. I mean, he's elevating things purposefully, and you don't see that. I don't think you see that a lot in international soccer, especially in coaches.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier that it's not uncommon for a club to protect a player or kind of prevent them from being released if there's an injury concern or so if it's really COVID or if it's really kind of like a sickness that they're concerned about, then it to me it's not outside the realm of possibility that they wouldn't want him to go if it would mean endangering his health or sending him to
Mm-hmm.
travel when his immune system's been compromised, something like that. So, you can see that perspective, but they're coming at it from the point where the South African national team coach, Bruce, kind of makes it sound like there's no reason for him not to be released. And if he's not released, they're going to file a complaint with FIFA,
Fair
which is
enough.
it's harsh to read that. I mean, that's a far, going really, really far in one direction about this whole scenario.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let's just get the conspiracy theories out there because I think people will be saying this anyway. One conspiracy might be that St. Louis um, wants to keep him and they don't want to send him. So now he does have COVID, or suddenly he tests positive and they don't have to send him.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe the South African coach is upset because he thinks maybe there's some funny business going on if the communication hasn't been as exact or as strong as he would like.
Yeah.
And another conspiracy theory might even be that MLS doesn't want, if maybe he has COVID and MLS doesn't want another bubble situation. You know what I mean? Like they're scared to death to let anyone know that there's COVID in the league, or perhaps even St. Louis doesn't want him out for multiple weeks just because the name COVID is on there and they force some kind of protocol on us. There's so much stuff out there. It could be once you start thinking about COVID and international breaks, like a lot of funny business goes on all around and all of those things. So
yeah, and I can see that perspective of you're somewhat hesitant to really give the full extent on a lot of injuries and timelines and things like that. So if a player, whether or not they test positive for COVID, just health and safety protocols, it's a safe term to use. And like I said earlier, it's really not too far of a stretch to just assume that means COVID. And it's
right.
in the world we live in, we live with COVID now. It's it's endemic. It's not a pandemic anymore. It's just a part of society, and that's where we've just gotten in the past few years. 3 years later, this is where we are. And so I don't know if I really so much buy into the MLS's concern about going back into a bubble, but I do buy into the fact that they don't want to publicize it nearly as much. And so you still don't want to have COVID outbreaks occur. You don't want to have that be a headline to a league or their team. So maybe there's a component of, let's just call it health and safety. Let's work through it on the back channels. But the thing that gets me is the piece in the article where they go to Bruce apparently didn't get a direct answer one way or another. And yeah, maybe it's City or MLS not wanting to really tip their cap too much if it truly is that, or if it's not. But then to go the quote of Bruce going to Blome and Blome apparently saying, yeah, I don't feel so good. I think I have COVID. That to me is bizarre, where you'd have that, the way that these conversations are occurring and who's saying what and different stories. COVID or not, it's a bizarre circumstance to be in for City.
Yeah, and when in doubt, I just like to downplay it. I like to assume the best in everybody. So
And
I
you
assume
said it.
Blome's going to go. I assume there's no COVID.
Yes.
Like I said, Manuel said the last time he heard that there were tests last weekend that it was negative multiple times. So
right.
I think he's going to go, and just maybe the communication got messed up. That sounds very human to me personally.
Well, and so. I can't remember if we said it on the KTRS or on the pre-show, but he mentions we're now 20 hours later, and yeah, there's a time difference here going on. And so that could mean an overnight period. So there's some, there are a lot of factors going on here about, when somebody was able to reach somebody else and how translations were, and making sure that whether or not it was Bradley Carnell speaking directly or whether it was a member of the staff, or PR, something like that. Who knows? This
Mhm.
is kind of like a bare bones article from a details perspective. It's hard to fit puzzle pieces together except for that one side of the story, which how often is one side of a story in this type of a situation ever entirely accurate? Almost never. So there's
Mhm.
no doubt that there's some
Yeah.
components of truth here. There's a side that City has, but if City's known for one thing, it is carefully crafting the narrative and the story and what they put out there, and it's never too much. It's never they never pull a Matt Baker and get too wordy about things. I'll tell you that.
What about Parker? What is Parker's injury? I don't think I remember that one.
We haven't seen what the actual Parker injury is. We just knew that he
Okay.
was pulled out of practice yesterday and kept out today on Thursday.
So that makes it sound like it's just a physical muscular
Yeah, and
ligament.
the quote from Carnell is that from today on Thursday again, they're going to give him 48 hours to rest and recover.
Hmm.
So it could be a muscle thing, but it could also be an illness, I suppose. Like I don't want to I
Mm.
really don't want to speculate too far on that because there's no point in that. But saying that they're giving him 48 hours to rest and recover is all we have to go off of right now.
Fair enough. Let's talk about, we didn't get to talk much about Lucas Bartlett. One thing I wanted to say very quickly was that when Bartlett came on, like I said, he said back five, but Nelson had come off, and I assumed Akil Watts was going to scoot over to left back.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He stayed in the middle, and it was Celia Pompeu playing kind of a left wing back. He was able to go forward still, but Nerwinski was kind of staying home a little more, which in a back five, we've seen exactly that sort of thing play out in City too. So I just thought that was fun and
And
interesting.
Celio, from reports, saw some time in a fullback, wingback type of a role during the preseason. It's definitely not his primary position, but for as a sub, you're going to find yourself where you need to on the field and where the team needs you to be. So he is a well versed on the left side, as he showed with City 2. That's where he started before the MLS players arrived. It's where he had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
his success in creating chances. If you remember last year, Celio was near the top of MLS Next Pro in chances created, mostly from the left side. When Ostrak came, he ended up going over to the right quite a bit, and so in preseason and in this match, I think it showed that has an ability to play in that wingback role for us because, like you said, we moved into a 5-man back line at the end of that match, and that kind of almost bridges a gap, right? It plays a similar position, but that flexibility that Celio provides, and we've seen him come in at the end of a couple games now, really just speaks to him as well as guys like Akil Watts in your ability to play a fullback, defensive midfield position and just give us a lot of that flexibility when you need to shift your formations at the end of a game.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And Celio posted his own highlights
Yeah.
on Twitter today, which I found funny. He's not the first, people do it all the time. But he looks surprisingly comfortable and still effective, almost equally effective as when he played for City too,
Yeah.
which I wasn't expecting.
Him along with Akil Watts and some of these other City 2 players, Kyle Hebert is the obvious example, but even Josh Yarrow, when
Mm.
he's been on the field, have really shown that what we saw from their success with City 2 wasn't just being able to compete against third division pro players and development players. It was that they're top of their league in that league, able to make the transition to be role players and rotation players in MLS. And, more power to them for that. I think it's an awesome
Yeah.
opportunity. And I'd love to see that be a continuous pipeline the City 2 is able to provide, not just giving homegrowns a spot to develop, giving MLS rostered players some time to play, but whatever types of player we end up pulling in from an undrafted position or from the USL or League One or something like that, that they haven't gotten their opportunity yet. They can shine for a year and then they'll get offered a contract. That's a cool pathway to me.
And it's amazing. And Celio could be a diamond in the rough if he's able to kind of become this super sub option and be effective. Many of his passes very well could have been assists. Like
Yes.
one was shot, above, Alm shot it high, but if he was on target, I mean, the ball was there to be taken. The goal was there to be taken. And what was I going to say about that? That it reminds me of Philadelphia Union, who had, when they got rid of Paxton Aronson, they went and picked up, I think his name's Torres. I forgot where they got him, but the dude is just like a dribbly freak.
Yeah.
He's the one that had that rondo in
Oh,
the
yeah.
midfield in that first week of MLS. So anyway, like Celio's that skill set. It just works in certain situations. So I'm excited to see how they use them this year.
Yeah, and I think so in the chat, Carver asked, what does our backline look like if Parker's unavailable? And we talked about the assumption that it would just be a 4-man backline and we'd plug and play one of Bartlett, Bell, or Yarrow. Do you think there's any chance that they go to a 5-man back or a 3 center back look and try to get, we're kind of struggling for depth right now with center back, so I don't think that's as likely. But it was interesting that we used that to almost park the bus, so to speak, at the end of the Portland match. I do see it. I think I do see it more likely that either one of those players just is plug and play though in a 4-man back line.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you. But I think if we ever try a 5-man back line, it'll be if like Leuven's out or something.
I can see a 5-man back line when Nilsson comes back. Right. Yeah. So if you have Hebert, like right now, everybody's talking about what's going to happen with Hebert. He's playing out of his mind right now, and he's getting national coverage for his performances. He had a team of the week performance for MLS. So if you have him in form as he is now, when Nilsson comes back, besides the fact that in Enable City, like you said you said in our group chat earlier that he doesn't have to be rushed back now. It gives that kind of ease if Hebert's in form. But once Nilsson comes back, a Nilsson, Parker, Hebert 3-man back line, and then whether you keep Nelson and Nerwinski or however those wing backs look, maybe you could plug some other attacking players in those roles. That's an interesting notion down the line, but it's an interesting notion.
Yeah. And I was thinking initially, not having Blom to cut off the counter, I thought that was going to be more damning than it was. And like not having Blom, it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be, especially against Portland. But who I'm interested in is like Minnesota's style of play seemed to kind of have our number. It always was effective, even if we were able to win the game or draw. I think was the best we did against them. But so like I'm curious, like if Blom isn't able to play when we play Minnesota, which I think is coming up in 2 weeks.
Yeah, Minnesota though.
2 or 3 weeks.
Minnesota United is very interesting because of Reynoso's absence right now. I don't think they haven't been able to replace him, first of all, and all indications are there's no timetable if he does return to the team. Very little information, but I think without a player like him, and with Minnesota United too, it was Aziel Jackson kind of able to create.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
So without those types of
same role.
Yes. Yeah. So without that type of a role on their first team, I don't see them causing as much trouble. But you're right. That style of an offense really prevented us from making a lot of forward progress, and it put us on our heels in a lot of ways. If they're able,
Sorry, that's what I mean exactly. I'm cutting you off because that's exactly what I mean is that like without Blom, we might not get caught on a counter, and it might not hurt to have 3 center backs just always back there. And sometimes that hurts you by always losing that extra man going forward.
Yeah.
But, having 3 guys back all the time, we don't have to worry about someone like Indy Vasilev tracking back. If we don't have Leuven, that might be something extremely worrisome. Miggy, we don't want to have to trust him to be the last man back in a certain situation. So I don't know. That's the only time I could see it. I think otherwise we don't see it is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, but at the same time, the way that this team had performed without Blom against Portland, and Portland was not in their they didn't really give it as much of an attack as we were expecting. So there wasn't as much pressure, I think, on it kind of aligns with the conversation of the Earthquakes, though, because the Earthquakes are going to be similar in that they're not going to have that verticality to it. They're going to try to pass the ball around, break us down, work the ball over, bide their time. The way that Indy Vasilev and Miguel Perez performed against Portland was a little eye-opening to me because first of all, I was expecting that if you have that, you're going to put Indy up front and Leuven is going to be that number 8 type of a player.
Same. That was such a shock. Yeah.
And to have Indy succeed in that role has been fantastic to see, because we knew coming into this season that he'd been given time doing that number 6 role in preseason, and out of necessity, because Blom wasn't here, he wasn't yet in form, and we're seeing that pay off in spades to me, prepping him for this position and allowing him to be comfortable when we need it. We weren't expecting to go without Blom so early, but now that we're here, all that work is paying off, and seeing him able to be that pivot against Portland was, I think that will serve us well. And one of the reasons I have Indy starting in our defensive midfield against the Earthquakes.
Yeah. And I said we don't want Miggy being that last guy tracking back, but actually I'd say that might be the best thing he did against Portland. So I think I'm wrong there.
The more back, the deeper he stays, I think the better off we are, because he does have some attacking prowess on his own when he's played for the Academy and City too. So it's not like that isn't there and he's not a danger there, but he was acting more like an early 20s player than he was a 17-year-old, being able to take some of these players on, really press towards a player and close some gaps. I would like to see more of him in that role, where he's kind of plugging the gap between our center backs, or between our center backs and our fullbacks, kind of like Blom was, where he's a lot deeper. He's almost like that single pivot in some instances on the defensive side.
Yeah, Colonel last week just said that Miguel is like a 40-year-old man in the way that he is able to, be reliable on the ball. He doesn't lose it. He's right. No. Here's another one from Ryan Hickerson, who said, so he's like 3. He hasn't gotten any of his predictions wrong yet. He's 3-0 as well. So he's predicting, he makes a great point, and I'm starting to regret my 2-0. His prediction is 3-2, because he's concerned about plugging someone like Bartlett and Hebert in the back. It's a really good point. It'd be weird if our clean sheet came with those 2 in the back, wouldn't it?
I was going to say, can we have different prediction scenarios? And so I'll wait to lock in my app score until I see if Parker's playing.
Exactly.
But it's not. I mean, that's not a bad thought if Parker isn't able to go. The thought that we might allow a few more goals. The one thing I'll say though is we're most vulnerable on free kicks and corner kicks, and the height advantage that Bartlett gives us, if he's able to correctly space himself and mark the player that he needs to. For instance, like if it ends up being a Bobasi or Espinoza, or one of those players, I think we'll have just as likely of a success with Bartlett in that role, defending those set pieces, as we do with Parker. I guess it's more the run of play, if he's able to head some of those balls out of the box, or be that. Because Parker, with his interceptions, like, that's not a fluke. Like, the way he's able to position himself and cut off some of those passes in the box is remarkable.
The man is a genius about seeing the play ahead of time and stepping. To the point where I was scared multiple times that he stepped too soon.
Right? And the way he's been able to position his head in those spots, I think Parker in the park. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if that's going to be our biggest thing that we miss by having whoever replaces him, but without Parker. So that in the run of play, able to position your center back to cut off those passes, that'll be the thing to watch.
Cool. Let's get a couple more topics in. Matt, you want to choose the next one?
Oh,
if not, we can talk about Firmino, because I'm going to just touch on that. I don't think we touched on it very long, if at all, last week.
I don't think we might have mentioned it last week, but we didn't go deep at all. So, and you talked to Manuel about it a little bit. So I'm interested to hear kind of if you want to let folks who might not have listened to that interview, how that went, kind of what your feelings are, because I have an anecdote I can share in a little bit for those who missed it on Twitter. But let's see what you say.
Well, just to review what Manuel said, that because I hadn't read all these details. So sorry if you've heard this from his episode, but he's on our discovery list and we are the first to put him on it, which is amazing. But that he seems to be more interested in Inter Milan, which who can blame him, right? So, but the fact that he would fit seamlessly into our roster, and they said it on Extra Time, and I was thinking it before. She said it. What's the new girl on Extra Time? Caden. No.
Caden Clark.
Yeah. I keep trying to mix them up. But anyway, she was saying, a lot of people are like, well, what about Klaus? No, play them together. They're like perfect together. I think they'd be a really cool team up top. But like Manuel said, that he's not really leaning our way, but it is absolutely possible in the same way that Ronaldo was possible at SKC. It was very close from what I heard. So if it doesn't work out at Milan, it seems like we might be a good option for him. And yes, to get it straight, Lutz wasn't just in Hoffenheim when Firmino was there. Lutz found him, I guess, in the Brazilian second division. I read in that article you posted, Matt, was such a good article.
Yeah, the idea, and that's kind of where my anecdote was going to come in, and it's Lutz felt like he overpaid for Firmino when he pulled him out of the Brazilian second division, because nobody really had eyes on him, and it was like, what are you bringing this guy in with these expectations of, I think it was like 3.5 million signing, and the rumor was that Lutz found him after playing Football Manager, and he was able to scout him using those kind of metrics. Lutz quickly shut down all of those rumors, by the way. It was something that I think the Sun reported back in 2016 and had been resurrected a few days ago. There was a very staunch denial of that. And it came because he was sitting down with like one of the developers of Football Manager, and there was like a misunderstanding from the person who was interviewing them. But it was in fact Lutz just able to scout Firmino and see that talent in the second division. So that speaks more to the examples of Lutz and his ability to just pull people from anywhere, and what kind of scouting know-how he has.
Yeah. Shocking, first of all, that the Sun got that wrong and published it.
I know. Yeah, shocking. What are the odds?
But yeah, I mean, it's got Celio vibes. We just talked about Celio. Like, finding someone in the Brazilian second division and bringing him to Germany, that's not much different than Virginia Commonwealth. Isn't that where Celio came from?
Yeah.
That's like, yeah, that's this tiny college. I mean, they're good at soccer, but still, it's pretty cool. And who knows? He could be our next Firmino.
Yep. And Caden Kyle is the host on Extra Time. I had to look that up because I was like, Clark doesn't sound right. It's Kalen Kyle, Extra Time, and 360, I think, is studio host for MLS Season Pass. But yeah.
See you, Ryan. Thanks for joining us. If you're in the chat, that's really cool. It's a lot more fun having you guys, especially in this wind down section. It's really good.
Yeah, it's definitely nice. I really enjoy that. And I think the Firmino thing too, kind of one of the other roster related items that this plays into is Max Schneider, another City signing from City 2, who took up an international spot, and we don't know, they didn't announce the specificity around his playing for City 2, but they did confirm that he had been loaned down to City 2. And so whether it is the situation we talked about last week, where every team is allowed a 1 season-long loan to their affiliate, where we're not provided salary relief, but we're provided roster relief in the sense that it won't take up an international slot, and we have a player that can replace him on the slot while he's loaned down. If Max Schneider is in fact that player who is loaned for the season to City 2, or while he remains loaned, we free up an international slot. So that's huge, because we had one, and this gives us a second one going into the summer transfer window. So Firmino or anybody else, as we know, Lutz has commented on it multiple times in public that he wants flexibility to remain. So we have 2 international roster slots at this moment in time, and we do have an open DP slot. We have for Firmino, that would come into play for Firmino. And some other things to consider, non-Firmino related, is that we do have young DP, U22 slots open. So all these different categories of players that MLS allows you to sign players for, and they don't hit your salary cap for their full salary. We have all these slots open. The third DP slot is huge, and teams are encouraged to sign younger DPs and rewarded for signing younger DPs in that third slot. But the penalty, more or less, is only $150,000 to the league if you sign a DP to your third slot who is over 23 years old. So it's negligible. And City has that flexibility in their salary cap, in their GAM and their TAM right now. There's a considerable amount of flexibility because of how we've constructed this roster, and all of that's going to help. So if you figure right now with Firmino in particular, he's making just under 10 million a year. And so he would be a big bank signing for City if you figure that's the dollar amount that we'd be signing him for. But if we can sign him on a free, I think that would make it a lot more tenable to bring him in.
Yeah, and so my question is, if we were to keep either Schneider or Bartlett on loan at City 2, one or the other, that's one slot freed up. Does that mean no matter whether he's a U22 initiative, young DP, full DP, does that mean we only get 2? We have room for 2 of those? Or is it like
so with Schneider,
multiple players possibly because of extra slots?
So with Bartlett signed, if you assume Bartlett is signed as a replacement for Nilsson right now, so he's only taking Nilsson's slot because he's on the injured list, and Max Schneider is loaned down, so his roster slot is freed up. That gives us 3 open roster slots.
Okay. And then when Nilsson comes back, though?
When Nilsson comes back, then that decision will be what to do with Bartlett. If Schneider's already loaned down, then it can't be an official season-long loan. But we do, again, have if Nilsson comes back and Bartlett were to take up another roster slot, we still have 2 open roster slots, 2 international slots, and all those other designations that they could fill. So there's still a significant amount of flexibility. And that's assuming that everybody makes it through healthy and we don't send anybody out. So don't forget, we could sell players just as easily as we could bring them in, depending on their form and their how much of a commodity they are. So 2 open slots, 2 international slots. That's not bad to go into a summer transfer window with.
Yeah, Charlotte's beating us in one regard. They sold a player before their season started, so we haven't done that yet.
That was the guy from Australia, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, they sold him to Middlesbrough or something, and he was a corner piece to their midfield, if I remember correctly. So yeah, they made a lot of money, but
I think they're in a promotion slot right now. So that's pretty cool.
Middlesbrough. Yeah, good for him.
Cool. Any last ideas you want to bring up? Maybe one more before we go, or are we good?
That's kind of all I had on my notes.
Same.
I think I don't know. I struggle looking at all these different articles, and we talked about all these articles that are coming out about City and how it's so cool to see us talked about now positively on the national landscape. People are coming around to what we've been saying for months and months and months. All these benefits of bringing in the MLS players early, City 2, the way we've constructed our roster, the fan support. Tom Bogert's piece on MLSsoccer.com was basically like, he's been listening to Flyover Footy for months, and he had all these things down. Now, obviously, that's tongue in cheek, obviously, but he was spot on with all of his assessments on why City is having the success they are. And it's great to see all this national coverage and this notoriety. And we always talk about how at some point we're going to have this bad run of form of 3+ losses, and how is the team going to react? How's the fan base going to react? I don't yet feel like the other shoe is ready to drop. Like the way that this team is in form, the opponents that we have coming up, yes, it is a very optimistic point of view to say, oh, we line up well against this team, so it automatically means we're going to win. That's not what I mean at all, because MLS is going to MLS, and MLS After Dark exists for a reason. Crazy things happen in this league. Kyle Hebert, I joked about his geometry, but that was a pretty crazy bounce that happened. Yeah. And we're going to give up some of these types of goals. And the more players that we have out for an injury, the more likely that is to happen. I wonder what the narrative will look like if and when we do lose. Not if we lose, but when we do lose, and what it's going to look like when we do lose. Because I can't see this team getting blown out, especially at home. I see it more of a nitty-gritty, where if we go down, we're going to continue pressing. We're going to try to stick to our style. We're going to try to make, like, to Jared Stroud's point in some articles he's had, like, he feels like he can spark the team with his play. And he has in certain moments, whether it's getting physical with a player. Berkey's done the same thing where he's getting physical with Charlotte and kind of sparking the fan base, sparking the players to do something when you're down a goal. And that St. Louis has the fight in them. Because we've seen it in all 3 games so far coming from behind. So I'm also interested on the outside of my thoughts on what the narrative is going to be, and how we would end up losing our first match when that eventually does happen.
Yeah, and I do think, to their credit, I think the MLS pundits are slow to change their minds. So yes, it's been a slow 3-week adoption of St. Louis, which isn't that slow, but
No.
it's a bit undeniable. The where we are is not an accident. But I think one loss, they'll be slow to say, "Well, I told you so." I think that it'll be a while. If it's 3 in a row, I think then they'll start trashing us, and it'll happen. If not this year, next year, or the year after. But just prepare for it, and temper your emotions, everybody.
Yep. And so before we go, I'll give two stats on San Jose because I do not want to end the show on that note, talking about like what happens whenever
Fair
we end
enough.
up with a loss. So I'll say some stats about San Jose, and these are a couple fun facts on both sides of the aisle. So San Jose, the Earthquakes are unbeaten against expansion teams since 2019. They're one of 4 teams in that time without a loss.
Hmm.
The Quakes do, however, just have 2 wins in their first away match against an MLS expansion team. So they don't score, but they haven't lost in 4 matches. They're 3 wins, 1 draw. If you remember, Portland was kind of the same way, though. Portland didn't lose against expansion teams, hadn't lost against an expansion team since
Hmm.
2016. So that stat might not mean a whole lot, but it's one of those interesting ones.
It is.
The one thing, though, that another stat that I think is more pertinent is because a lot of these San Jose Earthquake players are longer tenured on their team. They have a new coach in Luchi Gonzalez, but they don't have a full slate of new players. They have a lot of players who have some history with this team. So since the beginning of last season, San Jose has just 1 win in 20 road matches in all competitions, tied with the Rapids for the fewest road wins in all comps
Hmm.
by an MLS team in that time. So they're not a good road team, and their one loss this year has come on the road against an Atlanta side that sits 2 points less than St. Louis. Um, all of that with the play styles, the form that our players are in, and our predictions already, I think, do tell a good tale for St. Louis going into this.
Absolutely. These are all tackle and fuel, right? This is, I think our players are licking their chops at the possession. I'm excited to see how they do against that, and I don't think they're going to take for granted that it's going to be an easy out by any means. So
Nope.
I think we can put our trust in that. That's it, guys. Though, thanks for listening. This is Flyover Footy. Matt, thanks, man. It's been
Thanks, Phil.
fun.
Yeah, had a blast.
We'll chat with you guys next time. Bye, everybody.
See ya.